This week on the Characters of Boxing podcast. I'm sure you've seen Randall Tex Cobb in a movie, even if you're not a boxing fan. Check out his fights. He was a cool guy, funny guy, different kind of cat. You know, Tex Cobb kind of, to me, fits my theory that every part of America could be best friends with any other part of America. I know that we have our differences here in this country. There's a lot of left versus right. There's a lot of ideological battles, and I'm one of the type of people that has gotten to live in a lot of different parts of America: West Virginia, Rhode Island, Massachusetts, Illinois, Maryland, Virginia. I've lived in a lot of places in the USA, and I think there's some great people every single place you look. And, you know, the fact that a guy from Texas could come up to Philly and just become best friends supports my theory that, you know, in this country, in America, we have way more in common than we don't. You know, you go anywhere in this country, I guarantee you could find something that you have in common with another individual. You might be from Massachusetts, they might be from Alabama, you know, you might be from Seattle, they might be from Georgia. It doesn't matter. You know, we have a lot in common, and I think Tex Cobb represents that beautifully. He's this man from Texas, Bridge City, Texas, by way of Abilene, Texas. You know, it doesn't get much more Texas than that. And he has that thick Texas drawl to this day, that Texas accent. But you know what? He went up to Philadelphia to train at Smokin Joe's gym, and the city of Philadelphia fell in love with him, and I think he fell in love with the city of Philadelphia because he never left. And when I was in Allentown, Pennsylvania, in whatever it was, 1997, when I saw Tex Cobb, it was pretty cool. It was pretty cool to see him up there. That's his adopted home. He's the Texan that calls Philly home.
Welcome back to the Characters of Boxing and Beyond podcast. This is the podcast dedicated to preserving the history of boxing and its larger-than-life characters, and is brought to you by Clear Contender Media. Now, here's your host, Casey Kid History Callanan.
Welcome back to the Characters of Boxing podcast. Today's profile will be of an old school heavyweight, fought in the 70s mostly, born in 1950 in Bridge City, Texas. We're going to be talking about a man who had one of the greatest chins of all time. Maybe a recurring theme on this podcast, if you're an avid listener, is the fact that I love boxers that can take a pounding. I love boxers that have durable chins. I love boxers that are really hard to knock out. And today we have one of the greats that ever lived, someone that pretty much made their living by having a strong chin inside the ring, and someone who was quite the character outside of that same ring. I'm talking about Randall Tex Cobb, a native of Abilene, Texas, but really, as you'll learn in this podcast as we get more into it, he really represented, I think, the fighting city of Philadelphia. Eventually, he would go on to represent Philadelphia more than he would ever represent Texas, although he still, to this day, has that strong Texas accent. You won't make any mistake. This man is not from Philadelphia, but I think nowadays he represents and has represented for decades this fighting city of Philadelphia. We're talking about Randall Tex Cobb. I want to tell you a little funny story about me and Randall Tex Cobb. So when I was a kid, we would vacation on the East Coast of the United States primarily. We were living outside of Chicago, but we would take road trips to the East Coast where all of my extended family, cousins, aunts and uncles, aunts and uncles, depending what part of the East Coast you're from, they all resided on the East Coast. So one summer, and I can't remember, you know, this is definitely a faded memory. I'm not going to lie and say I remember it clear as day. I was probably 10, 11 years old, maybe even a little younger, that time frame. So this puts us at about 1996, 1997. And me and my cousin Kyle, we were with our cousins, and me and my cousin Kyle were hanging out in like the lobby of, wasn't like a world-class hotel, and it was either in the Jersey Shore or it was in Allentown, Pennsylvania. I cannot remember which one for sure it was. But sure enough, walking through this hotel lobby, again, my cousin Kyle, he lived in and around Ocean City, New Jersey, and I can't remember if we were on the shore or if it was in Allentown when we went to visit Dorney Park that one summer. And sure enough, walking through the hotel lobby, this gruff man, real curly hair, he was still acting at the time. He was long retired from boxing, but as we'll learn later, Randall Tex Cobb was a actor after his boxing career. It was Tex Cobb in the lobby of this hotel. And I read later that he spent a lot of time in Allentown, and I think it might have been when we were in Allentown, Pennsylvania. But my cousin Kyle, who was a couple years older than me, knew sports inside and out. He was a big Philly sports fan, and he called it out immediately. He said, that's that's Tex Cobb. And I had no idea who Tex Cobb was at 10 years old. I think I was just impressed by how gigantic and how scary this guy looked. You know, he kind of scared me. And what you'll find out later in this podcast is that Tex Cobb, after his career, was an actor and continuously played the theme of kind of a scary, tough guy, bad guy in the movies. Raising Arizona. He was in Ace Ventura, Pet Detective. He was in the movie Liar Liar. He was in a lot of movies. Tex Cobb, a extremely colorful character, and that is who we are profiling on the Characters of Boxing podcast today. So born in 1950 in Bridge City, Texas, but he grew up in Abilene, Texas. In Abilene, Texas, he played football at, I believe it's called Abilene Christian University. I'm a Chicago Bears fan, and there used to be a wide receiver from Abilene Christian, and his name was Johnny Knox, and he got injured. Shout out to Johnny Knox. He got injured at a young age and never really maximized his playing career. But Tex Cobb, big-time lineman at Abilene Christian. He did not graduate, but clearly this guy did care about his education, because I did read later in 2008, so about 10, 11 years ago, he did graduate with a degree from Temple University at the age of 58 years old. So obviously a guy that cared about his education, but made a name for himself as a boxer. So his black belt in karate, he got into the martial arts after his collegiate football career, getting a black belt in karate and also into kickboxing a lot. We talked about Butterbean on this podcast earlier. Butterbean also with that background in kickboxing. So eventually, Tex Cobb went ahead and graduated from kickboxing and got involved with heavyweight championship boxing. Early in Tex Cobb's boxing career, he got connected with I believe a manager who introduced him to Joe Frazier's gym in Philadelphia. So early on in the career of Randall Tex Cobb, he makes this transition from Texas to Philly, and that is where Tex Cobb, the Texan who represents Philly, not every day do you meet someone with a thick Texas accent who represents the fighting city of Philadelphia, but that is indeed the individual we are profiling today. So early on in Tex Cobb's boxing career, he gets sent up to Joe Frazier's gym in Philadelphia, and ever since that time period, he kind of adopted the city of Philadelphia as his own. He would finish his career at 42-7-1 with 35 knockouts. Biggest fight of his career would come in 1982 when he would fight Larry Holmes at the Astrodome. So this was a pretty famous fight. I know if you're familiar with the movie Rocky, a lot of people say that the movie Rocky is based off of Chuck Wepner, the Bayonne Bleeder. They say that the Bayonne Bleeder was kind of this guy who basically, Sylvester Stallone, when he wrote the movie Rocky, he based it all on Chuck Wepner's fight against Muhammad Ali. And a lot of people compare Tex Cobb. I've heard comparisons between Tex Cobb fighting Larry Holmes and the movie Rocky as well. Yeah, Tex Cobb was nowhere near the athlete that Larry Holmes was. These guys were in a completely different class, but they did go ahead and meet in 1982 at the Astrodome. This was a fight that Howard Cosell called. And for those of you guys who aren't familiar with Howard Cosell, he is a legendary American sportscaster who used to call Monday Night Football, I think with Dandy Don Meredith as one of his colormen. And this was all long before my time, but I have actually read Howard Cosell's biography. It's called Cosell by Cosell. Cosell was he was an ornery guy, which means kind of prickly. I've heard reports that he was just kind of an arrogant fella. I don't know anything about Howard Cosell, the man, because I never met him, but he did have his reputation as kind of a standoffish type individual with a very high opinion of himself. I do believe, reading in that, from what I remember, I read this book probably 12 years ago. What I remember from that book is he was like really good friends with Muhammad Ali. So, there's probably something there about Howard Cosell that the media wasn't reporting on. He probably had a decent heart or was a decent guy, but we just didn't really know about it. So you never can judge a man until you get to know him or walk a mile in his shoes. But anyways, the point is, in 1982, when Larry Holmes and Tex Cobb go at it, Howard Cosell's calling the fight. I think it was on this ABC. That's the ABC Wild World of Sports was what Howard Cosell was kind of known for a bit. And it ended up being Howard Cosell's last fight. The last fight that he would call. They don't call it play-by-play in boxing. We call it blow-by-blow. It was the last blow-by-blow fight that Howard Cosell would ever call, because he said the match was so uncompetitive, and he kind of pointed the finger at Tex Cobb, saying he just didn't belong there. And Tex Cobb, always the man to have a sense of humor, kind of a character guy, sly. I was watching some of his interviews earlier. He kind of had this quick wit personality in the interviews. He would make jokes like about how good looking he was, even though kind of he was being ironic because he was a very gruff individual. But Randall Cobb was known for saying after Cosell quit, he said, "That's great. Cosell quitting, that's the best thing that came out of this fight with me and Larry Holmes. What do I have to do to make him quit calling Monday Night Football? I'd go 15 more rounds with Holmes if I could get Cosell off the football broadcast." So that's kind of a character move. That's a great character quote by Tex Cobb. It's quotes like that are going to get you on this podcast. So Randall Tex Cobb loses to Larry Holmes in 1982 at the Astrodome in such an ugly fashion that Howard Cosell quits. Now, I've also heard people compare it to Randall Cobb being kind of a Rocky figure in that fight because of how close at times Cobb made the fight. So, I haven't watched the fight bell to bell, first round to 15th round. I have not watched it. I can't say. But from what I can tell, Cosell was being over the top dramatic, quitting boxing because of that. He said there was a problem with matchmaking so bad in boxing that he had to quit. Come on, Cosell. Calling a hockey game's tough, but there is no harder sport that I know of on TV to call than boxing. It is incredibly difficult to do. You have to see things in a moment's notice, that might not look like they landed, but they did land. And you have to deal with the crowd that overreacts to punches that might have missed. Calling play-by-play in boxing or blow-by-blow is extremely difficult. I think Cosell just wanted to get out of boxing because it's so hard and, get out of there before he embarrassed himself. Calling play-by-play in boxing, to me, I think I love Jim Lampley, who was on HBO Boxing. I thought he did the best job that I'd ever seen. I think Brian Kenny on DAZN does an excellent job. I love hearing his voice. To me, his voice says boxing. I think Joe Tessitore does a good job with ESPN Top Rank. I think his voice reminds me of ESPN2 Friday Night Fights, which I love so much. So I'm definitely a little biased when I hear that Joe Tessitore call. It brings me back to all those beautiful Friday nights over the years I had watching ESPN2's Friday Night fights. And actually, one of the fights I watched of Tex Cobb involved Whoa Nelly himself, Mr. Whoa Nelly, and that's Keith Jackson. Keith Jackson used to call the Rose Bowl game here in America every single, New Year's around that time when they had the Rose Bowl game, and Keith Jackson was college football. Keith Jackson, probably one of the most famous announcers in American history. He passed away maybe in the last 5 years or so. Really cool to hear Keith Jackson call a fight in a match I watched on YouTube. Tex Cobb go against Michael Dynamite Dokes. Dynamite Dokes, a native of Akron, Ohio, who passed away in, I think it was 2012, of liver cancer. So Randall Cobb and Dokes fought. I think it was only twice. Dokes and Cobb went at it, and Dokes would win both times. I think the best win and Dokes was definitely one of the best fighters of that era. Okay, I'm looking at this now. Dokes beat Cobb in 85 and 81. Let's just go through the tough losses. We'll give you the bad news first. So, as we said, Michael Dokes beat him twice. Larry Holmes beat him in 1982. And then Ken Norton, whose son, Ken Norton Jr., once played for the San Francisco 49ers, is a current coach in the NFL. I think Ken Norton Jr. is currently coaching in the NFL. But Ken Norton Sr. beat Randall Tex Cobb in 1980. Ken Norton Jr. is the current defensive coordinator of the Seattle Seahawks. I remember watching him play for the San Francisco 49ers in the mid-90s. And his father, Ken Norton Sr., who did beat Randall Tex Cobb in 1980, the subject of our podcast this afternoon. Ken Norton Sr. died in 2013. Rest in peace, Ken Norton Sr. In my opinion, the best win of Tex Cobb's career came in 1980 against Ernie Shavers. Ernie Shavers I don't think this is a knock on Deontay Wilder. I mean this as a compliment. I would call Ernie Shavers the Deontay Wilder of his day, just because Ernie Shavers had that one-punch knockout power that was almost mythical. It was so deadly. So Ernie Shavers was the big puncher of his day. He could knock you out in one punch. He could knock out anyone in one punch at any time. Ernie Shavers, that is his superpower. And in 1980, Tex Cobb got the best win of his career by beating Ernie Shavers, and that was before he lost to Ken Norton Sr. That win over Ernie Shavers was indeed a stoppage as well, a TKO coming in the 8th round. In a fight held in the Joe Louis Arena, the longtime home of the Detroit Red Wings. If there was going to be one other argument about what the best win of Randall Tex Cobb's career would be, I think you would point to his 1988 win over Leon Spinks. Leon Spinks was definitely out of his prime at that time, but I think the only other argument of the best win of Randall Cobb's career that you could make would be his win over Leon Spinks in 1988. So why is Cobb a character? The wit that he displayed in interviews was definitely catching the attention of Hollywood. In fact, he had, at the beginning of his career, or in the middle of his career, he was already starring in movies. He starred in the remake of a old boxing movie as the first major picture of his career. He appeared in a 1979 motion picture called The Champ, which was a remake of a really old boxing movie. A former boxer discovers that his biggest battle of all is going to be with his ex-wife, Annie, who returns after abandoning their young son 7 years prior. IMDb ranks it 6.8 out of 10 based on 7,200 votes. There was some... John Voight was in that movie. Those of you who watch Seinfeld know that George once owned John Voight's car. So that was his first movie. In 1979, he stars in this movie, The Champ. I can't vouch for this movie. I've never seen it, and I don't really have any interest in ever watching it. But as I currently am looking at Randall Tex Cobb's IMDb page, he was a huge movie star in the 80s. That was kind of his big decade, and in the 90s as well, it tapered off. By the time me and my cousin Kyle saw him at that hotel lobby in Allentown, Pennsylvania in about 1997 or 8, he was really at the end of his acting career. He was in Liar Liar in 1997 as Skull. I haven't seen that movie in a while, so I don't remember the exact actor that he plays, but you do the math. He played someone named Skull. Again, he's always playing a villain. He's got that burly look. Randall Tex Cobb, the character that he is. So even in the middle of his career, he was starring in motion pictures, and he must have impressed somebody when he did shoot that movie in 1979, because his career kind of explodes shortly after that. He's in Miami Vice, the television show. He's in Raising Arizona. That might be his most famous movie role. He plays Leonard Smalls in Raising Arizona. He's also in a great show that I used to like in the late 80s called MacGyver. So he's in Ernest Goes to Jail, which came out in 1990. I'm partial to the first Ernest movie, which is called Ernest Goes to Camp. But another popular Ernest movie is Ernest Saves Christmas. I'm sure you've heard of the Ernest movies. If you're not a fan of those, I don't know if I can say that they're going to hold up. So I've been watching Ernest movies since I was probably in middle school, but I do remember getting into Ernest Saves Camp or Ernest Goes to Camp, one of those movies. I don't know if the Ernest movies hold up, but so I can't recommend them. But he is an Ace Ventura Pet Detective, plays a guy called Gruff Man. He's a naked gun. This dude was a prolific actor and also huge recurring roles in a recurring character in the famous Chuck Norris series Walker, Texas Ranger. From 1998 to 2001, he appeared on Walker, Texas Ranger, always playing that desperado villain character. He had the look and he could act. You know, you don't just keep getting that many roles if you don't know what you're doing as an actor. He definitely sold the part. He could have probably been a great professional wrestler. I don't know if Tex Cobb ever did any professional wrestling, but right around the time me and my cousin Kyle saw him in that hotel lobby in Allentown, PA, his acting career was wrapping up. No clue what he really did for the next 7 or 8 years, but eventually he re-enrolls as a student, this time at Temple University in the north side of Philadelphia, and he graduated, which was really cool. He graduates with honors from Temple. I have no clue what he's been up to lately, but he's always leaving good quotes. I gave you the quote that he had about Howard Cosell. What did he say about Don King? So Don King, a very controversial figure in boxing and boxing history. Don King has been called just about every name in the book. Usually he's looked at as a dishonest figure in the history of boxing, but this is what Tex Cobb had to say about Don King. Call Don what you want, but he's definitely not a racist. Doesn't matter what color you are, he'll rip you off just the same. So that quote is attributed to Tex Cobb. He's definitely a different kind of cat, Tex Cobb. So he went all 15 rounds with Larry Holmes. We talked about that bout earlier and how that drew comparisons to the Rocky movie. Again, I haven't watched that fight, so I can't tell you too much about how I think Tex Cobb did, but that was his most famous bout, was against Larry Holmes in 1982 that he lost but went the distance. And again, all the movies that he's a villain in. He's also in Police Academy 4. Oh, and he's in Fletch 2. So that the second Fletch movie, which is called Fletch Lives, he's in. And so his last fight was in 1993, and then he went on to be an actor for about 7 or 8 years, and then graduated from Temple. There's kind of a rare, obscure YouTube video that I happened to stumble upon that if you are interested in learning more about Tex Cobb, the character, you can check out. He's at a roast of Larry Holmes, and Tex Cobb is like a legitimately hilarious comedic roaster. He's telling these hilarious jokes and stories about Larry Holmes. So there's a really obscure YouTube video out there about Tex Cobb kind of telling some jokes. So Tex Cobb also developed and maintained a friendship with a columnist from the Philadelphia News that in a reported incident, this columnist, his name's Pete Dexter, he got into a fight in a bar, I believe. There was a bar brawl in 1981, and Tex Cobb came to the defense of this Philadelphia News columnist, Peter Dexter. The reports are that Tex Cobb saved this guy's life. The barroom brawl was that bad, and in this melee, Cobb ended up breaking his arm. And at the time, 1981, this was at the tail end of Muhammad Ali's career, but they say that this incident where he broke his arm cost him the fight with Muhammad Ali. Not too many guys are friendly with the media like that anymore, so this guy was friends enough with the local media that he would literally save this columnist's life. Tex Cobb would save this columnist's life. And, I think it's acts of valor like that had Tex Cobb fighting for the city of Philadelphia. I think they really got behind him, and it was his adopted home. And unfortunately, I don't see a lot of fights that he had in Philadelphia, if any. But the city of Philly, he might have fought in Atlantic City a couple times, which is not too far from Philly, but the city of Philly adopted them as their own. And when the city of Philadelphia likes you, you kind of made it, because they certainly don't like everyone down there. But if you're one of the sports heroes that they like, you got it made forever. I'm sure that he could go anywhere in Philly and he won't have to pay for dinner, because that's how loyal of a sports town Philadelphia is to those that they love. I'm sure you've seen Randall Tex Cobb in a movie, even if you're not a boxing fan. Check out his fights. He was a cool guy, funny guy, different kind of cat. Tex Cobb kind of, to me, fits my theory that every part of America could be best friends with any other part of America. I know that we have our differences here in this country. There's a lot of left versus right. There's a lot of ideological battles, and I'm one of the type of people that has gotten to live in a lot of different parts of America: West Virginia, Rhode Island, Massachusetts, Illinois, Maryland, Virginia. I've lived in a lot of places in the USA, and I think there's some great people every single place you look. And, the fact that a guy from Texas could come up to Philly and just become best friends supports my theory that, in this country, in America, we have way more in common than we don't. You go anywhere in this country, I guarantee you could find something that you have in common with another individual. You might be from Massachusetts, they might be from Alabama, you might be from Seattle, they might be from Georgia. It doesn't matter. We have a lot in common, and I think Tex Cobb represents that beautifully. He's this man from Texas, Bridge City, Texas, by way of Abilene, Texas. It doesn't get much more Texas than that. And he has that thick Texas drawl to this day, that Texas accent. But you know what? He went up to Philadelphia to train at Smokin Joe's gym, and the city of Philadelphia fell in love with him, and I think he fell in love with the city of Philadelphia because he never left. And when I was in Allentown, Pennsylvania, in whatever it was, 1997, when I saw Tex Cobb, it was pretty cool. It was pretty cool to see him up there. That's his adopted home. He's the Texan that calls Philly home. So, Tex Cobb, you are a big-time character, and I hope everyone enjoyed this unique episode of the Characters of Boxing podcast, talking about an old heavyweight born in 1950, fought throughout the 70s and 80s, and up until 1993. We were talking Randall Tex Cobb. We hope you catch us next time on the Characters of Boxing podcast. For more character profiles, for more podcasts, for even blogs. You love boxing? Visit clearcontender.com/podcast. Catch up on old episodes. I'm your boy, Kid History. This has been the Characters of Boxing and Beyond podcast. Cheers.
Thanks for listening to the Characters of Boxing and Beyond podcast. This podcast is brought to you by Clear Contender Media. For more, visit us on clearcontender.com.